Bismillah. Today we're reading Islam between East and West. Right now we're going to go over chapter 1. I just got through it, and wow, what a beautiful, absolute beautiful chapter. So Ali Izetbegovic is continuing his theme of drawing this parallel between religion and materialism, and I believe eventually he's going to try to draw this point that Islam is like this perfect, natural understanding and combination of it. So this chapter is about creation and evolution. And he says that the reason we're going to start talking about this is because, look, we want to understand how men live their lives and how they should be living their lives. And to do that, we need to go back to man's origins, man's roots, right? And there's two, once again, he's putting this up, everything, all these viewpoints into two prominent themes. And he says two prominent themes here as well, of looking at man's origins. One of them is through evolution, and another one is through creation, right? And he basically says how in this evolution, materialistic understanding, man is just broken down into his constituent parts. He basically says that, look, when Darwin came, all Darwin did was just say, okay, man is just a product of his natural selection, and the strongest arrive, and then that's kind of led to where you were, right? You're originally something all the way back then. You kind of kept evolving through natural selection or whatever theories evolutionists today have, until you got to where you were, right? And then this natural selection happened through biology, right? And biology is just saying, hey, everything is going back to physical. He says it's a physical, chemical process, just a play of molecules. And at the end, all we have is just life, conscious, and soul do not exist, and consequently there is no human essence. And he's going to go more deep into life and the soul later down the chapter. And this is as opposed to like creation, right? Where creation is like this pure act of God, where God came and produced man himself, right? It wasn't just this full product of environment, or this product of evolution, or product of material naturalistic forces until we got here, right? Creation being like God created humans abruptly, and placed the soul in them, and placed the ability for them to have freedom and to think beyond like animals. And he gives a really good quote here, which I think many would like. He says, neither of them, meaning this idea of creation versus religion, will ever prevail over the other, for one is supported by so many irrefutable facts, meaning evolution, and some of the archaeological and historical evidences we have, right? While the other, meaning creation, is held in the hearts of all men. Once again, neither of them will ever prevail over the other, for one is supported by so many irrefutable facts, while the other is held deeply in the hearts of all men. I added deeply. It is only around man that two contradictory truths can exist. Only together can they give us the complete and true picture about him. And then he says, religion, I've also always claimed that, okay, evolution is definitely saying that humans were animals at some point, and there was like a point where we went from animal to human, and religion also acknowledges that. Religions acknowledge that humans have this animalistic nature in themselves. And then he says, okay, so now let's dig deeper into it. Think about it. At some point, right, there has to have been at some point a differentiating point where at first there was an animal, and then that animal evolved into its highest form of animal, and then you had the lowest form of human, right? And then there was that like fine line between them, right? Where at the animal you had just a being searching for food, trying to live, trying to survive, procreate, face his environment. And then as soon as you had a man, you had other things. You had taboos, you had a religion, you had beliefs, you had things like social anxiety or whatever. Cool. And then he says, look, there's another difference too, where animals are designed to be as efficient as possible. Yet when we see humans, they're not as efficient. And one of the biggest things that stops them from being efficient is moral principles, right? Moral principles. um, yeah. On the contrary, moral principles and like rituals and religion and practices, both in primitive and in civilized society, reduce man's efficiency. And then he says, okay, this is reduced man's efficiency, but man then compensates it with like intelligence. But then again, he says intelligence is also animalistic, right? Um, um, there could be very, very intelligent animals, right? There's nothing, there's no type of intelligence that a man has that isn't like different from like higher, very intelligent animals. Um, yeah. Then he gets so there's a differentiating factor between animals and human in evolution, and then he says as and yeah, someone might argue, okay, there's a gradual process, right? It might have been there was this ape, and he kind of was able to use a tool, but he's not really has all the faculties of human, and there's like in between, and it was a gradual process over time. But what really is like that differentiating factor between a human and a man? And he says clearly, the presence, meaning how do you know someone is definitely a man, is when they have taboos, or or some kind of religion. Meaning, he says right here, the presence of any kind of cult or taboo will, however, disperse any doubts. Like as soon as you see this being, how do you know if it's an animal or a man? If he has some taboo or doubts or social religious beliefs, then he definitely is a man, because animals don't have that, right? And he says whatever the merits of such a view, right? Whatever, if you take this view, you don't. The decisive difference between man and animal is neither a physical nor an intellectual, right? That really decisive, that like differentiating factor, it's a spiritual one, right? Meaning, that's how we can really for sure tell this is now a man and animal. And he's trying to basically point that out there, that if you really dig deep into it, the main difference here is a spiritual thing, right? Religion, ethics, morals, and so on. Cool. And he says, look, if you just look at evolution from just purely an evolution perspective, you're looking from back then, you would never be able to predict that humans would come about, right? Because there's nothing from animals that would lead to someone to lead to humans coming about, and their morals and their rituals and rites and whatever. And he gives some examples like sacrifice and worship, or rituals that slow down hunting processes, or things like he talks about the Arabic mu'aqara, where there's like competitions of being selfless, and so on and so forth, right? He says even if you keep going down this line of the evolution of animals, all you're going to get to is like this perfect animal, right? This like super animal. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And then he says, look, we really, as we try to understand where our origins are, we really need to think outside of the box, right? And he talks about how Einstein came around and thought outside the box, because everyone really just looked at it just like evolution may have a huge amount of irrefutable facts. Newton's theories of gravity and physics was also had a lot of irrefutable facts behind it. But then Darwin came about. Einstein came about, thought a little bit outside the box, and then broke Newton's understandings of physics, of gravity, relativity, and so on and so forth. He says, man is not tailored according to Darwin, nor is the universe tailored according to Newton. And then in the next section he talks about the dualism of the living world. And again, he's trying to draw these parallels. The dualism, there's two sides of the coin. And in this now, it's between biology and life, right? Where biology is not living, and life is living, right? And biology working towards going towards entropy, right? randomness, chaos, whereas life can bring about order, right, and structure. And biology just being like this a force of nature that is unable to choose and think and not be free, whereas life has this sense of freedom. Like personality, biology, product. Cool. And then he goes just again, just trying to kind of describing the difference between life and biology, and how just biology it just goes back to that materialistic view, matter and being inert, dumb, brute, and then just talks about some miracles of life like the eye, the brain, the liver, the cells multiplying, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and then hands off with a really nice quote where by Ghazali, where he says that all miracles are natural and all nature is miraculous. And then finally, at the end of this, he finally gets into humanism. This is where some of the questions I had got answered, because I always thought humanism was an atheistic philosophy. It was a belief that humans can do good and be good without like through inherent values, right? Without the need for God, right? So he says, okay, look, let's go back to the evolution part. There's evolution. At some point also, you had just nature, animals roaming around in nature. And then when man came about, man brought culture. Man brought civilization, right? And then man brought religion. And religion seems totally contradictory at times, seemingly, to nature, right? Nature tells us to eat. Religion tells us to fast. Nature tells us to procreate. Religion tells us to abstain. Nature says to always live in groups and big flocks. Religion seemingly, oftentimes tells us sometimes spend time alone, live in solitude. And he calls this the negative desire, right? This like contradictory position. And he says this negative desire is a crucial fact of human life on this planet. This fact, whether it's human damnation, whether it's good or bad, human damnation and privilege, meaning good or bad, but it is only the specific quality which makes a human being, this ability to resist nature. And this resisting of nature leads to freedom, right? It's what gives humans freedom. And this freedom, once again, this ability to have free will and to choose and to be outside of nature, or to act contradictory to nature, the laws of nature, is again what makes man man. Right? And this also gives us our moral compass and values, and it makes us no longer like innocent from the actions that we do. Right? And then because of this, we have tragedies, we have human dignity and moral striving, dilemmas, dissatisfaction, damnation, cruelty, and malice. Right? Animals know none of this. And he said this could only have been done by God, right? Only God was able to create, I'm just going to read a paragraph here. Only God was able to create a free creature, and freedom could only arise by the act of creation. Freedom is not the result of product or evolution. Meaning, once again, it's not just a product of our environment. God does not produce or construct. He creates, right? We used to say the same for artists. For the artist who constructs does not create a personality, but rather a poster of man. A personality cannot be constructed. I do not know what a portrait, a painting could mean without God. And then really relevant today and all the AI boom that's going on, maybe sooner or later, during the century, or after 1,000,000 years, man will succeed in constructing an imitation of himself, a kind of robot, something very similar to its constructor. However, he's going to say this robot is once again, it won't have this freedom. It's just going to be programmed, right? It's just, again, going to do whatever it's been programmed to do, right? Just like animals or evolution should have just led to, again, the super animal, and we should have just been entirely. And he talks about this early in the chapter too, how Marx and I believe it's Engels, who co-wrote the Communist Manifesto with him, says that humans are just a product of their social relations, right? And we always hear this saying that man is just a product of their environment, right? But then where does freedom come in? Where does free will come in? Where does morality come in? where does religion come in, right? How has this appeared? And he says this only could have been done because we were created by God, right? It can't have just been evolution. Yeah. Then he talks about how the soul, and I think this is going too long, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. One really nice thing he says too is like, okay, also to consider equality, right? A lot of these people who are trying to build theories and ways, theories on ways of living your life, are often atheists, and they fight for this thing called equality. And he says, look, you can only have equality with God. This idea of all men are brothers and we're all equal before all equal can only be with creation. Because if you just look at man without God in the picture, then we're obviously unequal. Some of us are stronger, some of us are weaker, some of us are faster. Some have certain skills that others don't have. There's definitely an unequalness there, right? But the only equalness that we could really have, right, is a spiritual equality. The equality of man is spiritual and not a natural, physical, or intellectual fact. Some really, really beautiful stuff. And he says, like, look, and this is one of the things that religion has helped people with, right? And this is why he says, like, Marx's ideas of how religion was created by the powerful to control the weak is not correct. Rather, Nietzsche's ideas of religion is more correct, where religion was created by the weak in order to tame the powerful. And he says this seems more likely because, I mean, not more likely, but this seems more plausible. Obviously, he doesn't believe it in neither of these theories, because, or this would seem more plausible because the poor often flock to their religion, right? The poor often flock to religion. Everything else, and because that's where they feel their equality, that's where they get some sense of safety or equality, or some feelings of not being I don't want to say worthless, but yeah. Why are there so many handicapped people around the mosque, churches, temples in which you enter, right? Why are there so many sick and uneducated being religious, right? Yeah. And he says this is what humanism is, right? Humanism is primarily the affirmation of man and his freedom. We talked about the freedom just a few minutes ago, namely of his value as a man. Humanism is not charity, forgiveness, and tolerance, but primarily the affirmation of man and his freedom. Everything that debases man's personality, that brings him down, is inhuman. Everything that lifts it up is human, right? So education could be inhuman or inhuman. It depends on the way you teach. If you teach to give people the ability to think freely and to think critically and to think for themselves, then that's human. That's human. But to train them to become workers or laborers or whatnot is inhuman, right? To reduce a man to the function of producer and consumer is inhuman, right? Even if you give every person a place in the society of being a producer and a consumer, right? Kind of taking some jabs there at socialism, communism. And then lastly, he answers my question, which I had in the beginning. Atheistic humanism is a contradiction, because if there is no God, then there is no man either. Also, if there is no man, humanism is a phrase without essence, right? There's no such thing as atheistic humanism. Why? Because humanism is the idea that humans can do good, right? But if you don't believe in God, then you don't believe in freedom, and you don't believe in humans, right? And so how can you be humanistic at the same time, right? Also, if there's no man, then humanism is a phrase without essence. And so that's pretty much the chapter. The next chapter will be on culture and civilization.